Either it was niche, high value added, or it was this sort of industrial model of a few bright people coming up with ideas. They would scale to many other people. Well, all the interesting spaces, I think, in future are going to be over here, and they're going to be where there are going to be many contributors. So here is where you get many contributors, but few beneficiaries. So this is increasingly open innovation programs run by companies, Procter & Gamble, Starbucks, Dell and others, who say, well, actually, there are probably many, many ideas out there, and what we need to do is channel them more into our company. So this is the X factor. This is the evil genius of Simon Cowell, which is, it's very costly to go and find talent, so we'll get the talent to come to us. Record sales are going down, and anyway, you know, prices of recorded music are falling, but live entertainment's becoming higher value. So what we'll do is have 11 non-stop weeks of live entertainment, and then we'll get the audience to become marketeers for the product. So Simon Cowell's genius is to sort of work all corners virtually of this diagram, because at the top there he's also creating kind of, you know, smash hit products from a few out to many. The App Store might be down here, the joy, the genius of Apple, where many contributors creating all these apps, but probably the key beneficiary is Apple. Except Apple's marketing genius creates the impression that it's also up there, where there are many contributors, but also many beneficiaries. And we're all very happy to be part of the great Apple way, the great Apple community, with a sort of benign dictator at its core. So Apple, I think, Facebook, Twitter, all these things are going to be circling around this space rather uncertainly. Actually, the real things, which are definitely up here, many contributors, many beneficiaries, are community open source projects. They are probably things more like Linux, possibly Wikipedia maybe, but actually really good cities are up there. Cities are spaces where there are many people who can sort of occupy and join the city, and many people can benefit from their activity as well. The reason that Barcelona is a great city is that that is what it feels like. So there are many more choices, it seems to me, about who you're with and who you're doing stuff with and by. And so many of the new spaces are going to be over on this side. So what will the systems of the future look like? Well, let me just leave you with this. This comes from the work, I've borrowed this almost entirely from the work of a guy called Simon Baron-Cohen, who is Sacha Baron Cohen's brother. And Simon Baron-Cohen is an expert in autism and Asperger's. And he says that Asperger's is really the interaction of two ways of thinking that we have, two ways of apprehending the world. One is a highly systematic way, which orders things, puts them in patterns, sequences, measures them. So you can have a highly systematic view of the world or a not very systematic view of the world. And you can have, the other dimension is empathy, whether you really connect emotionally with people or not. And again, you can have high empathy and low empathy. So if you put those together like this, and I'll explain this by reference entirely to television programs and films. So you get these four kinds of spaces. Simon Baron-Cohen says Asperger's is up here. It's highly systematic but low on empathy. People can order the world in all sorts of ways using prime numbers, colours, you know, number plates. Mark Haddon's The Dog in the Night captures that perfectly. But there are these other spaces. So this space down here, low empathy and low system. This is a world where there are no systems and there's no empathy. This is the world of Baltimore described by the television program The Wire. This is actually virtually any inner city dump estate in Britain. There are no systems because there aren't private systems. Public systems are very distant, but there's probably very little social capital. Very little empathy, few relationships. So these are fairly desperate sorts of places. These are low empathy but high systems. So if you're living in a world where you don't have any systems to support you and you don't have any relationships, then at least moving into a world where there's systems that might be an improvement. This is the world as described by the George Clooney film Up in the Air, where George Clooney is a professional downsizer, travelling America, sacking people. It's also the world of Lives of Others, which is East Germany under the Stasi, where there's lots of system, but absolutely no empathy. There's no feeling. Too much of our lives is actually lived up in this space, it seems to be. Too many public systems like this, where they're kind of targets, procedures, rules, regulations, but not enough in terms of relationships or human connections. This space down here, which is sort of low on systems, but the benefit is that it's high on empathy. So this is the world as described by Downton Abbey. This is a world before any big systems ever were invented. There's just a hint of the telephone and, you know, modern welfare systems and even maybe a modern political system. But basically systems don't yet exist in that sense. But there's lots and lots of relationships, probably quite hierarchical relationships, lots of relationships. This is the world of the Waltons. It's a world before systems where relationships existed. And that's very attractive. But the problem is for modern people, we can't do without systems. So this is like a sort of idealized, romanticized nostalgia, but it doesn't really work. And the really interesting space is, can you get high system and high empathy? And the best I could come up with there is Star Trek or Star Wars. And that's a real problem because that means that actually it's all sort of science fiction. The idea that you could have things which are both highly systematic, in other words, they're efficient, they're reliable, they work at scale, they're with you everywhere, but they're also the basis for very high levels of empathy. But those, it seems to me, are the systems of the future. That is where people want to be. High system, high empathy. What does that mean in terms of work? Well, down here, one might think this is the kind of completely fluid, low-skill, short-term contract economy, where you never build up any kind of relationship, but also there's really no system. You're just bobbing along in and out of lots of kind of short-term jobs, and your relationship with work is very kind of episodic. And those are the workplaces for that economy, are, you know, those places where that kind of work take place. Up here, system-driven service work, if you like, this is where it's very systematic, but there isn't much relationship, either with a customer or with your fellow workmates. This is, down here, the ideal of downshifting. I'm just going to get away. I'm going to go to Western Ireland. I'm just going to kind of bury myself in a cottage. And I'll have a little bit of broadband, but that's it. I'm going to eke out my living making stuff in a sort of new craft economy. And up here is sort of the Grameen Bank meets Google. It's kind of something with a social purpose, high on relationships, but also high on systems. Too much of our life, it seems to me, is lived hoping that we might get down to here and escape the system, but actually it's because we're up in this top left-hand corner. We're driven by systems and desperate for relationships. This is the Ryanair corner. This is the corner where a company does a deal with you and you buy something from them and then they declare war on you. And not only do they declare war on you, they encourage you to declare war on your fellow passengers. They encourage you actually to bring out the very worst in yourself in order to get onto the plane. So if that is the sort of Aspergers economy, Ryanair is the Aspergers economy, it's all system, no empathy. That is kind of where too many people feel they spend too much of their time. This down here is kind of, oh, wouldn't this be nice, but actually you can't make your living down here. And so it's the top right-hand corner, which I think is really alluring, but also quite difficult to imagine what it yet might be. But that is where people want to be. They can't do without systems, but they also can't do without empathy. And how you can provide workplaces and forms of work that provide that, I think, is the challenge of the future.
Well, thank you very much for a high system, and high empathy presentation. Really, we've had two wonderful keynotes this morning. Before we break for coffee, some questions for Charles. Are we too much of a 4 and 2 and not enough with and by? Who'd like to come back?
Carol Cole from Square Dot. I was just wondering if maybe some of the success of Facebook is because it's sort of highly systematic driven, but it's also trying to create high levels of empathy between people. I wonder if you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, they've taken that slide away, but I think that Facebook would...
Can we have that slide back?
Facebook would like to claim that it's up here, wouldn't it? Because, and actually, interestingly, it would, I think, claim that it's up there because it is high system, in the sense it's very simple, it's very systematized, it's very kind of, and so simple to use. And I think one of the characteristics of things that work up there are that they're relatively simple, and that means they're replicable, and they're also adaptable. So Grameen is very simple. Most of the sort of mass peer-to-peer things that I've seen that work are very simple. So they have a certain sort of system to them, but they allow people to adapt them to circumstance. And the dilemma for Facebook is really whether, under pressure from all sorts of things, it's heading in the left, heading to the left-hand corner. And so one way of thinking about the left-hand corner is this is algorithm land. This is where things get done by algorithms, which are insensitive to relationships. So I am on Facebook with my wife. My wife and I live together, we're still married, and we still have sex together. But Facebook recently told me to reconnect with her because we'd lost touch. Because what Facebook had done was it had mistaken a piece of information for a relationship. In other words, it had interpreted the lack of information flow between us on Facebook as the lack of a relationship. And that's the danger of algorithm land. Algorithm land is over on the left. And lots of those things find, I would say, much of the mobile phone world and Twitter is trying to be over on the right, I think.
Okay. Question over here.
Hello, Beatrice Orantes from Workspace Futures from Steelcase. I was just thinking I was wondering if you had some ideas about how to, in a way, systematize empathy, which is perhaps what this diagram is saying, because there are companies that it's very easy to systematize things that are inert. We can systematize having lots of coffee shops and what our menus are going to be. But if you add things like you have to smile at customers, that also becomes something that is low empathy in the end, because they just do it because they have to.
Yeah.
So is there a way to
I would say
how can you add empathy into a system?
Well, that I think is the sort of challenge, and I think that if you turn, basically all this empathy stuff is tacit, whereas systems are explicit. I would say systems often linear, empathy often interactive. Systems deliver, relationships create. So it's a completely different sort of mindset. So the personal relationship banker is an attempt to turn a relationship into a commodity, and therein lies death, really. But this is a really, actually the mention of death is a very real example, because actually the way I've just done a project whole of last year about how people die in Britain, and basically the problem is we've become increasingly dependent on systems in hospitals particularly that don't deliver empathy. And actually what people want at the end of life is relationships and empathy, but they also want pain relief. So if you were to imagine that, what that would mean would be what you've got is large acute hospitals as places to die. Dreadful, basically. You don't want to die there. Over here, what you want are homes properly equipped with support and technology that are strong on relationships but can call in systems when they need them, but are not defined by systems. They use systems as suppliers. So that's what I would say. And don't come up with a kind of script for empathy. It has to be a genuine human thing.